There's an abundance of entertainment media to consume nowadays. There's so much mainstream and there's so many niches that it's difficult to find something that you wouldn't have an interest in. But at the same time, all of that is sort of overwhelming. There's too much out there and new stuff continues to come out. There's always going to be some hot new series that comes out, but there's also a bunch of stuff that's already out and has been out that's really good too. If you constantly try to cover everything, you're going to end up in an inevitable endless cycle of never being able to get to everything. Even if you're only interested in a single niche, there's almost always going to be something new that will come out that will pique your interest. But sometimes, even while consuming media through some devised plan of tackling a bit of everything you want, there's another obstacle that you might run into: the lack of motivation to keep consuming. No matter what you want to watch, play, or read, you can't continue to consume it if you don't have the motivation to keep engaging with that content. Whether it be some event in a story that puts you off, or you can't get past a certain boss, or if you just feel burnt out. You might have found this show that's rated 10 out of 10 on IMDb or My Anime List, but if you don't feel like continuing the show for whatever reason, then just don't. If you truly can't bring yourself to continue watching, then just stop. There's no reason to continue if you can't, because it's not like you have to, unless you're actually obligated to do so. So here's the part of the video where I spin this to be about myself, because this is ultimately what I wanted to talk about. And I apologize if I lured you in with a false sense of expecting some kind of video essay, because that's not what this is. I am open to watching just about anything, and even the slightest intrigue will get me to write it down to watch it later because maybe I want to watch it at some point in time. And for the most part, I am able to get to them eventually. With such a large and diverse amount of animes that I've watched, I feel like that I've been able to get through and appreciate a lot of niches in anime. I'm not necessarily super into sci-fi and fighter jets, but Super Dimension Fortress Macross has a great story. Macross Plus is one of the most beautifully drawn and animated animes that I've seen. And I've also watched Delta, which I liked. Idols and Mechas? Sign me up! I didn't know if I would be into magical girl animes, but Cardcaptor Sakura turned out to be one of my high favorites in anime in general. Arakawa Under the Bridge? What the heck was that about? Okay, I'm gonna have to say that I'm joking before all the reading comprehension people start commenting. I watch so much because I want to know why these animes are loved and find an appreciation for them myself, but there's also too much for me to ever catch up on. And I totally understand that, but there are times where I've really wanted to watch or finish an anime, but I just couldn't bring myself to do so. This doesn't include like a new season or core coming out, and me just not having watched that because those wouldn't have been out around the time while I was watching whatever series that may have gotten a new installment. So let's talk about some of those unfinished animes. From memory. Sayonara Zetsubou Sensei is a satire and black comedy that was mostly geared towards Japanese society and culture. As you'd expect from a comedy, everyone had their own eccentricities. I mean, the title literally says Mr. Despair. So what even drew me into watching this anime? Well, in the summer of me going into sophomore year, I finished watching the Monogatari series, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the things that have stuck with me ever since was Shaft Studios' unique direction, and it's what made Shaft one of my favorite animation studios. So soon after, in August of that year, I was looking for more Shaft Studio animes because I really loved Monogatari and found Sayonara Zetsubou Sensei because it was another one of their works. I remember liking it, though if you asked me about anything particular in the show, I would not be able to recount anything, besides that the sensei wanted to KO himself and that he had 3 other brothers whose names were a play on words. And it did have that signature Shaft direction that I was hoping to get. Akiyuki Shinobu was the director, and he did a lot of work from Monogatari as well, so I was happy to see that in of itself. It's also funny to think that the 2 Shaft animes that I watched that year both had Hiroshi Kamiya as the main character's VA. I stopped watching on episode 5 of the 2nd season, Zoku Sayonara Zetsubou Sensei. There really was no other reason than me just not being motivated to watch anymore. I didn't necessarily dislike the show or anything, I just couldn't bring myself to keep watching. I pretty much get some sort of anime burnout every year that causes me to either take more than a month for an anime, or in this case and many others, just not finish at all. I heard that the manga is very good and the ending especially, so I'm open to picking up back the series again and maybe even reading the manga. There's a lot of animes that I want to revisit when I'm a little older into adulthood so that I can fully grasp and comprehend what is actually going on or what the message is that they're trying to convey, and I guess now this is one of them. When I say that I didn't finish watching Naruto, I mean the original 2002 to 2007 anime, when Naruto was still a kid. I haven't watched Shippuden or Boruto, but I do know a lot of the basic timeline of events that occurred in Shippuden, and a lot of the characters, and I used to watch all the openings. So, can you tell that I'm a Dragon Ball fan? I loved Naruto, and I still think that the anime is a very solid A tier anime. Every single arc just kept getting better and better, and the Sasuke retrieval arc is probably my favorite in the show. The iconic Naruto vs Sasuke fight at the Valley of the End is one of the most hype climaxes that I've ever seen on my first time viewing. I watched Naruto in 8th grade, and I binge watched a lot of it during my free time. It seems that I was the perfect age binging the right series for me at the time, so what happened? Obviously the Valley of the End fight was the end of Season 5, but unbeknownst to my foolish young self, Seasons 6 to 9 were actually all filler. I didn't realize this until I got to like Season 7, and by Season 8, I was feeling too burnt out just by a lack of exciting things happening to want to continue. Some people might say, oh, you technically finished Naruto, the rest is all filler. But I wouldn't consider myself finishing anime if there's a whole 4 seasons that are left unwatched. I can say that I finished watching the main canon up to that point, but that technicality was all that was needed for me to want to continue to the end, and eventually end up getting burnt out. Despite all that though, I actually remember liking Season 6, and the thing that I remember most was Rock Lee sleep fighting, which was one of the most badass things that I ever saw in anime up to that point. I recall the main villain having something to do with lightning, and that's about as much as I can remember. The common consensus that I see online is that these filler seasons were pretty lackluster, and part of me is grateful that I wasn't the only one that became tired of watching them. It's not even the fact that they're filler, because there is such a thing as good filler, but most of the content through seasons 6 to 9 was definitely not that. Maybe one day I'll get myself to finish seasons 8 and 9 just to say that I've truly finished Naruto. Kaiji Ultimate Survivor is actually an anime that a friend recommended me to watch. You know who you are. The premise was pretty interesting, and some people might flame me for this, but overall, from what I watched, it was kind of similar to Squid Game. The main character is struggling to pay off debt, he gets lured into playing a game at a chance to win a huge sum that can pay it off, but if he or anyone else playing fails, then they're basically enslaved for life. That's what I recall anyway. I genuinely liked everything that I watched. The psychological aspect, the tension, the stakes, so why didn't I continue? Well, again, it was just simply a lack of motivation. I remember starting this around the time that I finished watching Steins Gate, and coming off of an anime that I really enjoyed, I guess I just didn't have it in me to propel through a series that I may not have been super hooked into, even if I did like what it was getting at. I've heard a lot of praise about Kaiji and Fukumoto's other well-known work, Akagi, so I'll have to pick it up one day to see how it develops. Also, the very next anime that I started watching after being unable to finish Kaiji was Azumanga Daioh, and I did enjoy that and did finish it, so... Azumanga Daioh is better than Kaiji confirmed? I haven't delved much into the sci-fi slash mecha genres of anime that much. I mean, I have watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I did like, the Macross series as mentioned before, and Gurren Lagann, which if you're interested on my thoughts about, then stay tuned towards the end of the year. I enjoyed all of those, some more than others, but I always felt some sort of satisfaction by the end. This anime that I'm about to talk about though, I wasn't really motivated to finish, and it was one that I actually watched this year. The anime that I'm talking about is RahXephon. I actually found RahXephon by literally clicking random on a website a couple of times until it spat out this anime. It seemed to have a decent rating on Mal, even though we all know nobody's opinions really matter but your own, and I gave it a shot. The basic premise is that a high schooler, Ayato Kamiya, is living his normal life until one day Tokyo Jupiter, which is where the story starts off at, gets attacked by an enemy force, and through a series of events, a potentially dead or ghost-like classmate guides Ayato into discovering an egg, and he ends up unleashing the powers of what's called the RahXephon. And through the next couple of episodes in the beginning arc, we get to see that Ayato's entire worldview is a complete lie, and everything in Tokyo Jupiter is a lie, for reasons that I won't get into. I mean, I'm not here to summarize these animes, I'm just here to talk about what I thought about them and why I didn't finish them. even though that's exactly what I just did. The immediate first thing that caught my attention in the first episode was that the anime was made by Bones, and knowing Bones, at least through Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood and Soul Eater, I had high expectations. Granted, this was before both of those shows, and I was not disappointed. I loved the art, the animation was very technically impressive, especially with the action scenes with the RahXephon and other entities. It is a dang good anime to look at. Now for my thoughts on the story. I think that the lore that the writers were trying to tell was very intriguing, and there's a lot to learn about the different parties, enemy forces, what Tokyo Jupiter is, and just the characters themselves. I could totally feel that whoever was on the writing team was trying to flex those creative muscles really hard, but I think at times they flexed a little too hard because there are a bunch of underlying subplots, at least from what I remember, that were being built up, and there's a lot to keep track of, and so many characters that are being built up for something more, and I think that can be overwhelming at times. To the writing's credit though, I do think that they were very thorough, and I like that they fleshed out the world and characters for as much as they did. When I was watching the first couple of episodes, I did see some similar tropes to Evangelion. Main character who is a naive boy that's reluctant on using their powers, main character's parents being the head of a successful company, older woman who takes in the main character and might also have crush on the boy. I don't necessarily see the similarities as negatives, more just inspiration, but I can definitely see how some people might be turned off by certain characteristics of the anime being similar to Evangelion or other animes, because those were certainly the first things that came to mind for me. So if I apparently seem to have so much praise for this, then how did I lose steam with it? Well, for starters, it was already hard for me to watch episode to episode, which is just a problem that I've had in general this year with watching anime. Usually my rule of thumb while watching something is to watch one episode a day, but it would take me a couple of days just to get myself to watch the next episode, and even then I really had to push myself to watch it. And I think part of that sort of comes down to the fact that it's more of an expository show and kind of a slow burner for me. I will admit that I ultimately enjoy action, whether that be fighting, sports, or thrillers, and most of the other sci-fi/mecha animes that I've listed before have those kind of moments, but for RahXephon, they haven't really hit it for me. That's not to say that the anime doesn't have those kind of moments, but most of the action in the show is halted by the literal internal battles that Ayato has with these other entities, which is interesting, but not as interesting on a surface level compared to something like swords clashing. I will admit that it's just a me thing though. I want to eventually finish RahXephon one day because looking back at it, it had a lot of strong qualities, and maybe the ending of it will be worth all my patience and the build-up. I don't know because I've only watched 15 out of the 26 episodes, but one can hope. If you're someone who's into deep lore or mecha or sci-fi, then I would suggest this because you'll probably get a lot more out of it than me, hopefully. Fairy Tail will forever hold a special place in my heart because it was one of the first animes that I ever watched. I have an odd history with watching it, and ultimately just a really wholesome message and nostalgia that I get from reminiscing about it. Let me tell you about the history that I have with Fairy Tail. I started watching it when I was in 4th grade when a friend recommended it to me, and at the time my parents had an alternative app installed onto our iPad that had tons of shows, but also anime and maybe some cartoons as well. And as a young child with an iPad who didn't really know a lot of things about the internet beyond my established scope, I didn't know that it was a pirate app at the time. And what I did not know is that because Fairy Tail had a hiatus and sort of rebranded its second series as 2014, the app also had the second series as its own anime shown when searching up Fairy Tail. So as a kid who knew nothing about Fairy Tail, I began watching the anime from the 2014 series. I know how ridiculous that sounds and you probably have questions. And to make things worse, the series picked up back in the middle of an ongoing arc, so I was really left just figuring out things for myself. Despite all of that though, I never questioned it as a kid, and I just picked up knowledge about all the characters through continuing to watch from that point. I have no idea how I had the will or stupidity to go on like that, and I did finish the second series and watched Fairy Tail Zero. I did eventually watch the first series and finish it up to the hiatus, albeit on YouTube this time, but starting from the Daedalus arc, so both times that I picked up the series, I didn't even start from the beginning. So, great job, younger me. I love Fairy Tail all the same though, and no matter how many times I'll see people online calling it mid, or my friend calling it a One Piece clone, it will continue to be special for me. I was an impressionable and even younger than when I watched Naruto Kid, so it really stuck to me even if I was brainwashed into thinking that it was mid. I thought Dragon Slayer magic was the coolest thing. I didn't even care about the animation because I was a kid and I really enjoyed it a lot. Also, I remember covering the screen with my hand to only read the subtitles because sometimes the shots would just be pure breasts front and center. Yeah, Fairy Tail is not beating the fan service allegations. All of this brings us to this year. When I finished watching Fairy Tail, it was around 2016 and there were no more episodes out, but the story hadn't concluded. And then in 2018, the final series of Fairy Tail released. I know nothing about how good it is in terms of quality, except that the art style is slightly different from the 2014 series, and I have some knowledge about certain events in the final arc because I read about it when the manga was ending. So I always wanted to finish the anime to sort of bring closure to my Fairy Tail experience and truly understand the entire series. So, during this year of burnout, I decided to rewatch the entirety of Fairy Tail plus the final season so that I could achieve that, and I was actually making a lot of progress within the first 2 weeks of me watching. I also did have a lot of free time in school to just mindlessly binge episodes in whatever time I had, but I finally watched everything pre-Daedalus in about 2 weeks. My usual slump started to occur around the Tenro Island arc. As great as that arc is, I just started to get burnt out. And it's not as if I wasn't enjoying it, but the motivation to watch just continued to slip. And by the time that I got to the Key of the Starry Sky arc, I was completely burnt out. I mean, sure, it's a filler arc, I could have skipped it, but I wanted to get the full Fairy Tail experience. And it's also mentioned in the manga, so it's technically canon. And I know that I'm just one filler away from re-experiencing one of my favorite arcs, but I just couldn't push through. Some people say that this arc has a weak beginning but strong ending, though the weak beginning was not helping my case of already getting burnt out. This is still one of the animes that I really want to finish one day, and I'm sure that day will come eventually. Just like how I finished Punk Hazard after 5 months in the manga. Hey, so I wrote this script about a month ago, and I'm happy to say that at the time of recording this, I'm actually in the second half of the Grand Magic Games arc in the 2014 series. So the rewatch continues, and maybe that day that I finish Fairy Tail will be closer than I anticipated. It's inevitable that people will sometimes decide to stop consuming something for whatever reason. Even if your friends bug you on and on about how good something is, it doesn't mean anything if you simply just can't bring yourself to read or watch or play it. You don't need a valid reason to stop watching, you could just stop. I mean, look at me, I stopped watching all of these animes for basically the same reason. You shouldn't need to force yourself to continue something if you really aren't feeling it, even if literally everyone else on the planet praises it. And ultimately, nobody else should care about what you do or think about media besides you, because it just doesn't matter.